Chapter 84. This venerable one stole a kiss, and you don't even know it. When Chu Wanning woke up, it was to the sight of Moran staring into the middle distance at the table with his cheek propped up in his hand. The reflection of the candle flame flickered in his pitch-black eyes, bright in his vacant gaze. Chu Wanning thought about getting up, but there was no strength in his limbs, and he had to surrender. The patterned lilac curtains wafted. He turned onto his side, watching Moran without a sound. The silly boy remained lost in thought, ignorant to the fact that his shizun was awake. Who could blame him? Anyone who found out that their lover already had a son with some other woman would be equally shocked. Was Shia really Chu Wanning's child? How could that be? Chu Wanning was so aloof and particular. What woman could hope to catch his eye? Besides, if this whole thing was for real, then he must have had a kid in their past life too. But in all the years he had spent with Moran in that life, Chu Wanning couldn't have been further from what one would expect of a married man, both in his daily conduct and between the sheets. But how else was he to explain this golden butterfly hair clasp? Moran banged his head against the table in anguish, about to lose his mind from sheer confusion. He wasn't that smart to begin with, and he had never been able to wrap his head around twisty-turny things. The more he thought, the more his head hurt, until he finally grabbed his skull and flopped onto the table with a despairing "Ah!" and stayed there, unmoving. "Moran, what are you doing?" asked an even, soothing voice, pleasant like the chime of scattering jade, though the undertone was slightly hoarse. Moran instantly bounced up in surprise. "Shizun, you're awake?" Chu Wanning coughed lightly before looking up at him. "Is this Rainbow Isles Inn?" "Yeah." Moran stood and moved toward the bed, where he noticed a small tear in Chu Wanning's lower lip. His face swiftly turned red as he remembered how he had lost control in his lust-induced haze and had very nearly made a serious mistake. "What is it?" Chu Wanning asked upon noticing his perturbation. Nothing. Moran waved his hands and hastily changed the subject. "Anyway, Shizun suddenly fainted at Xuanruan Pavilion, so I brought you here to rest. Then I got a physician to take a look at you and prescribe some medicine, and then I heard you sleep-talking. I was reminded of some past affairs, couldn't stop myself and kissed you." Of course he couldn't say such things. Moran trailed off, his gaze uncharacteristically frantic, even flustered. When Chu Wanning heard that he'd been examined by a doctor and saw the strange expression on Moran's face, his heart dropped. Had Moran learned of the poison that turned him into a child? His hand subconsciously tightened on the quilt as he rasped. "What did the physician say?" "He said Shizun was affected by that holy weapon, and that's what made you faint." Moran hesitated. "Shizun, your spiritual core. Don't worry about it. It's just a bit weaker than average." Moran blinked. He was thinking about the scars that lay over both Chu Chun and Chu Wanning's hearts, and considering the possibility of some kind of connection. However, the way Chu Wanning spoke of it, that didn't seem to be the case. He couldn't help asking, "But how? Shizun is so powerful. There's no way your spiritual core could have always been so frail. When did it happen?" "A long time ago. I was injured once, many years in the past, and it's been that way ever since." Chu Wanning waved his hand indifferently. That wasn't what concerned him. "Did he say anything else?" Moran shook his head. "Nope." Chu Wanning considered him in the dim haze of the candlelight. "Then why were you banging your head on the table?" For a long moment, Moran was mute. He tried and failed to hold it in, so he threw caution to the wind and produced the golden butterfly hair clasp from his sleeve. He set it in Chu Wanning's palm. "I found this." Chu Wanning did not reply. On you. The hair clasp glinted in the light as Chu Wanning's heart sank lower and lower. So he had been found out after all. He sighed quietly. A few moments passed in silence, neither of them speaking. Finally, Chu Wanning closed his eyes and was about to come clean when he heard Moran mumble in a small voice. Shizun, is Shidi truly your son? Chu Wanning was struck utterly speechless. He opened his eyes, and the blood that had been frozen in his veins began to circulate again. For a while, he didn't know what to say as he stared silently at Mo Wei-yu, who stood by the bed with a complicated expression. Then, slowly, a clear verdict formed in Chu Wanning's gaze. Moron. That's right. Chu Wanning lifted a hand and calmly took back the hair clasp before Moran could react. Didn't I tell you before? Why are you asking again? Moran buried his face in his hands. I'm just making sure. Yet, despite Chu Wanning's repeated confirmations that Xia Sini was indeed his flesh and blood, Moran didn't quite buy it. Shoving down his intense feelings of dismay, he decided to grill Xia Sini about it next time he saw his little Shidi. Until those two actually acknowledged their blood ties to one another, he would sooner die than believe it. After a bit of rest, Chu Wanning recovered some strength in his limbs and moved to sit up on the bed. My clothes. He ran his hand over his collars and paused, frowning. Why are they so disheveled? Moran hurriedly steered the topic away, fearful that Chu Wanning might remember some fragments of his earlier behavior. Shizun, you must be hungry, right? I heard the food at this inn's pretty good, especially the Wensi tofu. Let's go down and get a bite. My treat. Chu Wanning shot him a cold look. What, with the money I gave you? He still shook out his voluminous sleeves and opened the door to go downstairs. Rainbow Isle's cuisine was similar to Yangzhou's, light and refreshing, with a tendency toward sweetness, and very agreeable to Chu Wanning's taste. By now, the auction was over, and many of the attendees had already left. Moran and Chu Wanning had also requested a private booth, so there was no longer much need to wear cloaks to conceal their identities. After they took their seats inside, a waiter came and poured them each a cup of bilorhun green tea, then handed them a menu before retreating. Shizun can look through the menu first. You can order. I'm pretty content with all Jiangnan-style dishes. Chu Wanning said as he lifted the cup and took a small sip of tea. His brows furrowed as soon as the tea touched his lips and he paused. What is it? Too hot? It's nothing. Maybe the weather is dry. My lip is a bit cracked. Chu Wanning touched the corner of his mouth uncertainly. Weird. When had that happened? Moran lowered his head in guilty silence. It would be a while before the food was ready, so Chu Wanning took the time to discuss the events at Xuanyuan Pavilion with Moran. They had left early, so they didn't know who'd won the holy weapon in the end, but that wouldn't be too hard to ascertain if they asked around. As they conferred, an assortment of Yangzhou dishes began to cover the table. Chu Wanning felt like they had reviewed all that they could of what they knew, so he stopped asking questions to look over the food lining the table. He paused for a moment before lifting his eyelids slightly to glance at the person across from him, whose smile was a tad nervous. Have you been to Jiangnan before? Chu Wanning asked. Moran had, of course, gone to see the apricot blossoms and misty rains of Jiangnan in his previous life. However, he hadn't forgotten that he was only 17 at present, and that he had only joined Xixing Peaks about 2 years ago, so he immediately shook his head. Nope. Chu Wanning's eyelashes lowered back down, his expression neutral as he said in a clear voice. But you ordered all the best dishes. Moran started. Only then did he realize that he had ordered every single dish in accordance with Chu Wanning's preferences. His only thought had been to make sure Chu Wanning ate well, so that he could recover his strength. He had entirely forgotten that he shouldn't be so familiar with the local cuisine. "I worked in the kitchens of a pleasure house when I was young," he said. "So I've heard of these dishes, even if I hadn't tried them." Luckily, Chu Wanning didn't press the issue. "Let's eat." Freshwater fare was a big part of Jiangnan cuisine, especially on Rainbow Isle, where there were baskets of crab and shrimp and strings of fish as far as the eye could see. The square beach table was naturally laden with seafood. Crispy fried eel with sauce poured over it, sweet and sour squirrelfish, crunchy without and tender within, steamed mantis shrimp, chrysanthemum sautéed sea snail, and braised silver carp. It smelled heavenly. Aside from those, the meat and vegetable dishes were just as exquisitely made and elegantly plated as were the desserts. There were stewed crab meatballs, savory pork trotter jelly, shredded tofu simmered in chicken broth, soup dumplings, wenzi tofu, and more. With his cheek in one hand, Moran watched the waiter set down the last dish, osmanthus cake, and snuck a glance at Chu Wanning, wondering which dish he would go for first. He pondered for a minute and secretly placed his bet. Definitely the meatballs. These were Chu Wanning's favorite Yangchu dish, after all. Sure enough, as soon as the dishes were all out, Chu Wanning's chopsticks reached unhesitatingly in that direction. Moran sighed to himself. This guy is always so predictable, be it in how he eats or what he does. It's always the plop. An adorably plump meatball landed in Moran's bowl. Same. Moran's head snapped up, surprised at this show of favor slowly crossing his face. "Shizun? Thanks for taking care of me these past few days." Wait, had he heard that right? Moran was astonished. Had Chu Wanning just thanked him for taking care of him? Never once in the entirety of their last lifetime had he ever said any such thing. Chu Wanning watched as the young man across from him slowly turned red, his eyebrows lifting higher and higher, and his eyes getting rounder and rounder. A tuft of hair even curled up from his head to sway happily back and forth. Chu Zongshi didn't quite know how to react, but he had to preserve his dignity, so he took another lofty sip of tea. Ow, my lips. Truth be told, during the days he'd spent by Moran's side as Shiasini, Chu Wanning had begun to feel a little guilty. When he thought about it late at night, he had to admit that his personality really was too harsh, and he had been overly stern with Moran. So he told himself that when he returned to normal, he would no longer carry on in that way, that he would do better. When Chu Wanning had met with the Chuanji elder at Peach Blossom Springs, he had hemmed and hawed for a good long while before finally forcing the words past his lips and asking how to be less intimidating to disciples. Chuanji had understandably been taken aback before answering. "First, you have to actually show them that you care." Show them that you care. Chu Wanning assumed that Moran had never had these meatballs before, so he parted his lips to explain. Stewed crab meatballs are made with finely minced, high-quality streaky pork that has been mixed with shrimp roe, crab meat, and crab roe and rolled into balls. They are then simmered in a clear broth with bok choy and finally arranged in a red clay pot for a colorful presentation. Moran was thoroughly dumbfounded. What was Chu Wanning reciting the menu for? However, to Chu Wanning, patiently introducing new dishes to his disciple was a form of showing care, and so, throughout the course of the meal, Moran tried every dish in turn and got an earful of descriptions that sounded like they had come straight out of Jiangnan recipes. If not for Chu Wanning's low, soothing voice, Moran probably would have flipped the table and left. Hey, did you hear yet? Yinyi Rufeng sect won the last item at the Xuanyuan Pavilion auction. The private booths were divided by bamboo screens, and the people in the next booth over were a bit loud. The conversation drifted easily over to Moran and Chu Wanning. Chu Wanning abruptly stopped introducing savory pork trotter jelly to exchange a look with Moran. They listened with rapt attention. A rough-sounding masculine voice was speaking. "Of course I have. A holy weapon, right? 300 million gold, paid on the spot. Higher, that price. It was more gold than I've ever seen in my entire life." Sheesh, is that all you care about? Don't you know that Rufeng sect also spent 50 million on a butterfly-boned beauty feast? Heavens, aren't you supposed to eat those? Or dual cultivate with them? Can't believe the biggest sect in the world would use such a reprehensible method of cultivation. And right out in the open too. How scandalous. Actually, Su Chong, cultivating through use of beauty feasts is perfectly reasonable. It's not in the least bit prohibited. They may look like us, but ultimately they're not human. It's no different from eating fairy fruits to advance yourselves. When you get down to it, there's nothing wrong with the practice. We'll just have to agree to disagree. Someone else laughed lightly. The one who bought the beauty feast is apparently some young disciple of Rufeng sect who rarely shows his face. Something she. I heard he looks decent enough. Wouldn't have expected some guy like that to rely on screwing women to cultivate. If you ask me, Rufeng sect is on its last legs. Still, another person chuckled. What's wrong with that? Who doesn't love a beauty? Then the conversation turned to roundabout debates on ethics and morality, nothing worth paying attention to. So Rufeng sect bought the holy weapon? Chu Wanning repeated quietly. Sounds like it. Chu Wanning seemed troubled. That makes things more difficult. We'll have to go to Rufeng sect to investigate further. Moran let out an as he remembered something and muttered. Shizun used to be in Rufeng sect. Don't wanna go back? Chu Wanning looked irritated at the mere mention of returning to them. They may be a famed sect in the upper cultivation world, he said, brows furrowed. But I once. Before he could finish, there was a sudden commotion in the main hall. Someone was yelling loudly. Innkeep, we'll give you 500 gold if you get rid of these people and clear them out this instant. Our young master is reserving the whole place today.